Welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at a really foundational, heavily researched educational text today.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one.
Right. It comprehensively breaks down, well, what a constitution actually is, like why societies absolutely need them. And it gives us this incredibly specific, detailed look at how the Indian Constitution was forged.
And our mission today is really to extract the why behind these ultimate rule books of society. I mean,
Mhm.
we're stripping away the dry legal jargon to understand how a piece of paper actually shapes the fundamental identity, the power dynamics, and, the daily reality of millions of people.
Exactly, because you might think of a constitution as this dusty historical document sitting under glass in a museum somewhere.
Right, something totally disconnected from real life.
Yeah. But it's actually the invisible operating system running in the background of your life. I mean, it ensures everything from your physical safety on the street to your freedom to choose your own career.
It really is the underlying code for everything we do.
Okay, let's unpack this because to really understand why this matters, I want you to imagine something. Imagine being trapped in a massive room with 100 people you have never met.
Oh boy.
Right. And you all have completely different religions, or, some profess no religion at all. You have different jobs, drastically different incomes, different physical abilities, and totally different tastes in everything from books to movies. And you are just stuck together.
That is quite the scenario.
So, how do you survive in that room without tearing each other apart over resources or rules?
Honestly, it sounds like a psychological experiment waiting to go catastrophically wrong.
Yeah.
But, you've perfectly described the default state of human civilization.
Right. It's just society.
Exactly. When you put that many competing interests in a shared space, the very first function of any constitution is to solve that exact coordination problem. It has to provide a set of basic, enforceable rules that allow for, well, minimal coordination amongst members of a society.
Minimal coordination. So, just enough so we don't start a riot, basically.
Precisely. Because think about what happens if there are no basic rules in that room. You get profound insecurity.
Yeah, nobody knows what's going on.
Right. If there is no agreed upon rule book, you wouldn't know what rights you have over your own property or what your neighbors might be allowed to do to you. It just breeds constant paranoia.
It reminds me of trying to play a really complex, brand new board game with your friends.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Like if you just open the box and start moving pieces around without agreeing on the manual, people are going to get angry, someone is going to flip the table, and the game is over.
Total chaos.
Right. Before anyone rolls the dice, you have to agree on the basic rules. But even more than that, you have to agree that the rules actually mean something, right?
Yes, that is so important.
Because if my friend just ignores the rules and, steals my Monopoly money and nothing happens to him, I'm going to stop playing by the rules too.
And that is the crucial mechanism at play here. These rules must be publicly known, meaning everyone in the room knows what they are, and critically, they must be legally enforceable.
Because if there are no consequences, why bother?
Exactly. If you have no assurance that others will follow the rules, you have absolutely no reason to follow them yourself. The enforceability is what gives everyone the psychological confidence that if someone breaks the rules, well, there will be consequences.
It establishes trust in the system itself.
Right. Rather than just trusting the individual people, which, as we know, is impossible in a giant room of strangers.
Okay, so we agree we need enforceable rules for the board game to avoid chaos. But that immediately leads to the next massive hurdle. Who gets to be the referee?
The million-dollar question.
Because in our locked room, I might think my rules are the safest and most efficient, but you probably think your rules are the best. How do we decide who actually gets to write the manual?
Which leads us directly to the second function of a constitution. It has to specify who has the power to make decisions in a society. It dictates how the government will actually be constituted.
And historically, there have been a lot of different ways to do that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of different structural answers to that question.
Right.
In a monarchical constitution, a single king or queen is granted the authority to decide.
Right.
But in the old Soviet Union, for instance, the mechanism was entirely different. A single political party was given the constitutional power to make all the decisions.
And in democratic systems, the people get to decide. But even then, there's a mechanism to figure out, right? Like, do we all vote on every single tiny rule, or do we elect representatives to do it for us?
Exactly. A constitution has to define that exact architecture.
Yeah.
So in the Indian constitution, for example, it explicitly specifies that parliament gets to enact laws, and it dictates the intricate details of how that parliament is organized, who gets to sit in it, and how they are chosen.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me. So we essentially build this massive engine, let's call it a nuclear reactor.
Okay, I like this.
We need the immense power of the state to keep the lights on, to build roads, to maintain order. But if we give an authority all that power to govern us, how do we make sure it doesn't melt down and destroy our civil liberties?
That is the eternal tension.
Right. What if that parliament decides to pass a law that is just completely tyrannical?
That is the eternal tension of government. You need a reactor powerful enough to generate energy, but you absolutely must build incredibly dense, fail-safe control rods so it doesn't obliterate the city.
Right. To keep it contained.
Exactly. And that brings us to the third function, setting limits on what a government can impose on its citizens. These limits are fundamental. The government can never lawfully trespass them.
And the source material highlights what an unrestrained meltdown looks like, which is pretty terrifying.
It really is.
Imagine an authority passing a law that prevents you from practicing your religion, or a law that says you aren't allowed to sing certain songs, or wear clothes of a specific color.
Which sounds absurd, but it happens.
It does. Or, even more seriously, that people with a certain skin color aren't allowed to draw water from a public well, or that you can be arbitrarily arrested in the middle of the night for no reason at all.
And those examples illustrate exactly why most modern constitutions protect a basic cluster of fundamental rights. Freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of association.
The control rods.
Yes, these are the control rods in your reactor analogy, keeping the raw power of the government in check. The mechanism usually involves a judiciary courts that can strike down laws if the government oversteps those fundamental boundaries.
Okay, but wait, let me push back on this sequence of events a bit.
Sure, go ahead.
So we essentially create a monster with the power to make laws and then immediately have to build a cage to protect ourselves from it?
Essentially, yes.
But then, if we are so terrified of this reactor melting down, why do 20th century constitutions seem to give the government, more things to do?
What do you mean?
Well, if you look at newer constitutions, they don't just say, don't be a tyrant. They actually give the monster a to-do list of good deeds. Aren't we just giving the machine more power?
That is a brilliant observation, and it marks a massive philosophical shift in constitutional design.
Oh, really?
Yes. The fourth function of a modern constitution is to act as a positive enabler. Older constitutions largely just restricted power. They were purely defensive.
Right, just don't do this, don't do that.
Exactly. But many 20th century constitutions, with the Indian Constitution being a prime example, recognize that in deeply unequal societies, a hands-off government just isn't enough.
It doesn't fix the underlying problems.
Right. You actually have to empower the government to fulfill the aspirations and goals of the society.
Okay, but how does a piece of paper actually force a government to fix systemic issues, though?
By mandating it as a constitutional duty. Take South Africa, for example.
Okay.
After a horrific, entrenched history of racial discrimination under apartheid, their new constitution couldn't just say, don't be racist anymore.
That wouldn't be enough.
Not at all. It actively assigned the government the structural responsibility to dismantle that legacy. It mandated the state to promote nature conservation and to progressively ensure adequate housing and health care for everyone.
Wow, so it's literally written into the rule book that they have to provide housing.
Exactly. And there's Indonesia, where the Constitution specifically enjoins the government to establish a national education system and to look after poor and destitute children.
That's a huge mandate.
It is. And in India, you have a society with deep entrenched inequalities like caste discrimination. The Constitution actively empowers the government to take positive welfare measures to overcome that historical deprivation.
It's basically authorizing the state to intervene to lift people up.
Exactly. It is about creating the structural conditions for a just society, not just preventing an unjust one. The Constitution becomes a motor for social progress.
Okay, so if this piece of paper is both a defensive shield against tyranny and a motor for social progress, how does a remarkably diverse group of people actually agree on what progress looks like?
It's not easy.
I mean, how do you get millions of people to share the exact same rulebook and feel like it actually belongs to them?
What's fascinating here is the fifth function of a constitution,
Hmm.
expressing the fundamental political and moral identity of a people.
Identity. Okay.
Yes. Before a constitution, you might have many fragmented identities. You are defined by your religion, your profession, your region.
Right.
But by agreeing to a basic set of norms about how you will be governed together, You form a collective political identity.
The source contrasts Germany and India to really highlight how different this can look, which I found super interesting.
Yeah, it's a great comparison.
Historically, German identity was constituted by being ethnically German. The Constitution expressed that specific ethnic identity as the basis for belonging. But the Indian Constitution does something entirely different. It does not make ethnic identity a criterion for citizenship at all.
Not at all.
It weaves together incredibly diverse groups based on shared political values and norms, rather than a shared bloodline or ethnic background.
And this concept of identity is directly tied to the ultimate question of effectiveness. Because, it's one thing to write beautiful, lofty aspirations on a piece of paper.
Anyone can do that.
Exactly. It is another thing entirely for those words to have actual authority in reality. Many constitutions around the world are just mere words on a parchment that dictators completely ignore.
Right, which brings me to a phrase from the material that I want to pause on. It talked about a constitution's mode of promulgation.
Yes.
In plain English, are we just talking about how the rule book was actually rolled out to the public and who got to write it?
That is exactly what it means. Who crafted it and how did they present it to the people? A constitution drafted by military dictators or unpopular leaders usually fails miserably because those figures don't have the ability to carry the people with them.
Right, nobody trusts them.
Exactly. The psychological ownership just isn't there.
Look at what happened in Nepal. The text mentions that between 1948 and 1990, they burned through 5 different constitutions.
5 of them.
And the structural mechanism for that failure was always the same. They were all granted by the king of Nepal.
Right. And when a king grants a constitution, the ultimate power still logically resides with the king.
It's his rule book, not theirs.
Exactly. The people have no real psychological ownership of the rules. So the moment the rules squeeze them, or the king oversteps, the people rebel because they never genuinely agreed to the system in the first place.
Which is exactly what happened.
Yes. The king actually took over all powers in 2002, which led to immense popular agitation. The people demanded a popularly elected constituent assembly.
They wanted to write it themselves.
Exactly. Ultimately, the king had to yield. Nepal abolished the monarchy in 2008 and transitioned into a democratic republic, finally adopting a new constitution in 2015 after a massive people-led process.
It really shows that a document handed down from on high is basically a ticking time bomb.
Oh, absolutely.
Contrast that with the successful ones. The United States, South Africa, India. Their constitutions were created in the aftermath of massive popular national movements.
Yes.
The people who wrote them had immense credibility from day one because they had just led the country to freedom. But there's a flip side to this that really caught my eye.
Oh, what's that?
What happens if a constitution is written, but it completely ignores a huge chunk of the population?
Then it becomes a castle of cards.
A castle of cards.
Yeah, as the source points out with a cartoon about Iraq's constitution. If a constitution systematically privileges one small group at the expense of others, or if it ignores the identity of ethnic or religious minorities, it becomes incredibly fragile.
Because half the room hates the rules.
Exactly. It ceases to command allegiance. A constitution has to give everyone, especially minorities, a genuine, rational reason to go along with it. If it inherently disadvantages them, why would they ever obey it?
So what does this all mean for the actual people on the ground? Can a constitution actually survive? Can it really hold authority if it is never put to a direct public vote?
That's a great question.
Because, a national referendum seems like the ultimate test of whether the people actually accept it.
It is a totally logical question, and some countries absolutely do subject their constitutions to a full-fledged referendum where every citizen votes yes or no.
Right.
But here's the remarkable thing about the Indian Constitution. It was never subjected to a national referendum.
Wait, really? Not a single nationwide vote on the final document?
No.
How did millions of people just accept it?
They accepted it because of the immense public credibility of its framers.
Oh, wow.
It was crafted by an assembly that had the capacity to negotiate and command the respect of a vast cross-section of society. The people adopted it as their own by simply abiding by its provisions, because they trusted the exhaustive, inclusive process and the leaders behind it.
That process is a massive part of the story, and honestly, the logistics of it are just mind-blowing.
Truly.
Let's look at the Indian Constituent Assembly. They held their first sitting in December 1946, before independence was even finalized.
Right.
And they adopted the final document in November 1949. It came into force on January 26, 1950.
Just try to picture the sheer logistical challenge of this in a pre-digital 1940s India. The members were chosen by indirect election by the provincial legislative assemblies.
Okay.
The math they settled on was roughly 1 seat per 1 million population to ensure proportional representation.
So you had 292 members representing the provinces under British rule and a minimum of 93 seats allocated for the princely states. But then you have the horrific violence and partition of the country in 1947. The assembly was reduced to 299 members, with 284 actually present to sign the final document.
A very turbulent time.
But let me ask you this. After partition, the Congress Party completely dominated the assembly, right? They held like 82% of the seats.
They did.
In almost any other country, a single party with that much dominance would just write a constitution that made them dictators for life. How did that not happen here?
Because the Congress Party itself was incredibly diverse internally. It accommodated almost all shades of political opinion, from radical socialists to conservative traditionalists.
So they were arguing amongst themselves.
Exactly. But more importantly, the framers were absolutely obsessed with balanced institutional design. They understood that constitutions are usually subverted not by the general public, but by small, concentrated groups trying to grab power.
So they intentionally fragmented the power.
Exactly. They spread the power horizontally across the legislature, the executive, the judiciary, and even independent statutory bodies like the Election Commission.
Clever.
Very. The mechanism is designed so that if one branch tries to go rogue or seize total control, the others have the constitutional authority to check its power.
But beyond just the legal mechanisms, there is a behavioral concept from the assembly that I absolutely love, the idea of public reason.
Yes. The true genius of the Indian Constituent Assembly was how they conducted their debates.
It's like being in a massive high-stakes debate club where you aren't allowed to just stand up and say, I want this rule because it helps my specific religion or my specific community.
Right. You can't just be selfish.
Exactly. You are structurally forced to provide a principled, logical reason that the other side can actually understand and respect. It forces you out of your own narrow self-interest and forces you to argue on the basis of universal principles.
That is a perfect way to describe it. The members didn't just advance their own sectarian agendas. They engaged in reasoned argument with the interests of the whole nation in mind.
Which is pretty rare in politics.
Extremely rare. Every major issue was debated with incredible sophistication and intense scrutiny.
Yeah.
Should India be centralized or decentralized? What are the exact limits of property rights? What should the powers of the judiciary be?
Big questions.
Huge. And they fought over all of it using public reason.
Which makes this next detail so profound. Out of all those incredibly complex, divisive issues in a highly stratified society, there was only one provision in the entire Indian Constitution that passed virtually without any debate.
Universal suffrage.
The idea that all citizens, upon reaching a certain age, would be entitled to vote, completely regardless of their religion, caste, education, gender, or income.
Yep.
Why did that pass so easily?
Because of the underlying psychological and political necessity of the moment. In a society so deeply divided by caste, by religion, by massive wealth inequality and low literacy rates, denying anyone the vote would have instantly illegitimized the entire democratic project.
It would have ruined the trust.
Exactly. It was a radical leap of faith. They didn't even feel the need to debate whether everyone deserved a voice. They recognized that true democratic authority required every single person to have a stake in the system.
They just knew it was essential.
Right. They agreed on it fundamentally and moved on to the harder mechanics of government.
It is a staggering testament to their commitment to democracy, and it leads beautifully into a famous speech from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, one of the chief architects of the Constitution, delivered in November 1949 as they were finalizing the document.
Oh, this is a powerful speech.
He spoke passionately about the necessity of social democracy, not just political democracy.
And he laid out a philosophy that is just as relevant today. He talked about the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And he argued that they are not separate items on a menu.
You can't just pick one.
Right. They form a union, a trinity. You cannot divorce one from the other without defeating the very purpose of democracy.
Let's break down the mechanics of why he said that. If you have liberty without equality, what actually happens in a society?
Well, you produce the supremacy of the few over the many. The wealthy and the powerful will simply use their unrestrained freedom to dominate the weak.
That makes sense.
Liberty without equality just becomes the freedom to exploit.
But if you force equality without liberty, he argued that it would kill individual initiative.
Exactly.
Everyone is made exactly the same, but no one is free to innovate, to speak their mind, or to excel. It becomes a stagnant society.
And then there is the third pillar, fraternity. A sense of shared brotherhood and common identity.
The glue holding the room together.
Exactly. Without fraternity, liberty and equality would never become a natural course of things. They would constantly have to be forced upon the population by the heavy hand of the law rather than being lived, organic values that the people actually believe in.
It is such a delicate, precise balancing act, and if we zoom out for a second, it really synthesizes the entire journey we've taken today. A constitution isn't just a legal barrier keeping the government at bay.
No, it's so much more.
It's a society's highest aspiration. It's a pragmatic tool for minimal coordination so we don't tear each other apart in that locked room. And it's a carefully balanced fragmentation of power, a reactor with control rods designed to ensure no single group can ever take over the whole board game.
So the next time you are reading the news and you see a Supreme Court case being argued or a controversial new law being struck down, remember what you are actually watching.
It's the blueprint in action.
Yes, you are watching this exact blueprint actively at work. You are watching the invisible operating system trying to maintain that delicate balance between the authority of the state, the rights of the minority, and the aspirations of the people.
It really changes how you look at the daily headlines. It's not just petty politics. It's the real-time maintenance of the core code of our civilization.
It is. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, one that builds on this idea of balanced institutional design.
Okay, lay it on us.
The framers of these mid-20th century constitutions intelligently fragmented power based on the institutions that existed in the 1940s and 50s. They built control rods for rogue executives or overreaching legislatures.
Right.
But if a constitution is supposed to be a living document, and its core job is to limit the power of entities that could dominate our lives, how might our fundamental rule books need to adapt today?
Oh, that's a big question.
Because we are now living in a world alongside massive multinational tech corporations and rapidly accelerating artificial intelligence. These are entities that increasingly control our communication, our commerce, and our access to truth itself.
Wow. Yeah.
Will the next great constitutional debates of our era be about how to fragment the power of algorithms and tech monopolies rather than just the government? Will we need to define a whole new set of digital fundamental rights to protect our liberty and equality in the 21st century?
It's a question we are all going to have to answer soon. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.